Well, Eli Bremer is a former major in the U.S. Air Force. He's also a Republican strategist, and he's joining us live from Colorado. And here in the studio, I'm joined by Negar Mortazavi, a senior non-resident fellow at the Center for International Policy. She's also the host of the Iran podcast. And here in the studio, we have our senior correspondent, Osama bin Javaid. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for being with us. Osama, I want to start with you because I want to talk to you about this note that's come out from Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, requesting a 2 weeks delay for consultations and for negotiations to continue. What more do we know about this?
Well, speaking to our sources, we can now confirm that Shehbaz Sharif is pushing for a last-ditch effort. In the last few minutes, there's been a flurry of phone calls between the Pakistani foreign minister and the foreign minister of Turkey, of Saudi Arabia and Egypt. This is the quad that has been involved in so much of those negotiations that have been taking place first in Riyadh and then in Islamabad, pushing for these sides to come together. What these sources have also told us is that Pakistan is in touch with all parties to the conflict, and no one has shown a willingness to ditch diplomacy. So there is still a flicker of hope that is available as the clock ticks to this deadline by President Trump. What the Pakistani government wants to show is that there are still off-ramps that can be taken by both sides, appealing to President Trump as well as to Iran of possible options. And it is, according to our sources, this is also a message to the detractors that exist on both sides. And according to Pakistan, the biggest detractor on all of this is Israel, which does not want to see an end to this conflict. These sources are telling us that Pakistan wants to shoulder this responsibility. This is not a Pakistan only a proposal that is on the table. Pakistan is leading the effort, but it has the backing of all of these countries. And it is in a unique position to push this forward because it has the backing of regional countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, of the region, because Pakistan has a border with Iran and Turkey has a border with Iran. So it has the backing of Turkey. It is also in a unique position to have open lines of communication with Iran and with China as well as the United States. So all of this is putting it in a position where it is still hopeful. We've seen quiet diplomacy in the last few weeks, and now it appears that Pakistan is going all out to try and bring, at the last minute, some sense of sanity to bring people off the ledge.
Eli Bremer, the way that Osama is describing it there are a significant number of countries who are backing this proposal. This is not just necessarily something that is coming from Pakistan. There does seem to be a sense that there is a hope for some grounds for negotiation. How do you think this is going to be accepted by the White House?
I don't really see President Trump being influenced by having more countries out there supporting this particular proposal. President Trump what he believes he's doing right now is rectifying 47 years of failed policy around Iran, particularly with the concerns of Iran being allowed to pursue nuclear weapons, as well as rockets that can now reach Europe and potentially could reach the United States before too long. So I think that President Trump is very likely to basically say he doesn't mind going it alone, continuing to pressure the Iranians to fully disarm and dismantle their systems. So, I think with other previous presidents, this would have had a bigger impact. I think President Trump right now believes that he's got the ability to finish the disarming of the Iranians, potentially by taking out their power plants and their bridges, and then forcibly, require Iran to not have the nuclear weapons and the rockets that he has said from the beginning he is going to prevent them from having.
Negar Mortazavi, Pakistan is suggesting that Iran should open the Strait of Hormuz for a similar amount of time, a couple of weeks, in order to make it essentially a goodwill gesture so that negotiations could continue. Given the threats that Iran perceives from the US and from Israel, do you think that it's likely Iran would be open to that suggestion?
I don't think so. I mean, Iran is subjected to a war that's unlawful according to U.S. and international law without a vote from the U.S. Congress, without a vote from the UN Security Council, without consultation with closest U.S. allies. It's a war that's unpopular inside the U.S. among the majority of the population, every poll shows, and also no U.S. ally, Europeans, NATO wants a part in this war. And the Iranians feel like they're Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz card is essentially one of the golden cards that they've played. This is part of a strategy of a weaker party, the underdog that can't match, of course, the military might of the world superpower, which is the US, and the regional power, which is Israel. But at the same time, they have escalated in an asymmetric war. They've escalated horizontally. They have opened new fronts across the region. They have spread the war outside of their borders. And now with the Strait of Hormuz, they have a chokehold on 20% of global energy, and they've been able to drive up energy prices and really transfer some of this pain to the global community, hoping that then they would put pressure on Washington to end this war. So I don't think they're going to give that up at the beginning. And potentially we're seeing that they want to expand this into even potentially after the war into some form of economic gain as a result of this.
Osama, you wanted to come in there.
Well, I think it depends on who you speak to. I asked this question with the Pakistanis that, why would Donald Trump, who has amassed all of these troops, who's put himself in this corner, who've upped the ante so much, would back down? And then vice versa with the Iranians, because Strait of Hormuz is essentially their nuclear option, and they've used it. For them to be able to give that up, they need some real guarantees. And according to these Pakistani sources, what they want to tell Iran, that if you want to tell the world that you're in control, you should be able to open it and close it. What the Iranians have been doing is that allowing about 15 or more ships in the last 48 hours to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran could come back and say, well, it is already open for our friends. And President Trump, because he wants to be the president of peace, the president who wants to establish peace in the world, this is something that he rallied his vote bank on, can actually take this opportunity to regroup and rethink. And it just gives more time for diplomacy to function. So there is the possibility of an off-ramp. And again, as one source told us, that the Pakistanis said that they can only take the horse to the water. Whether it drinks or not is up to them.
Yeah. Eli, I want to ask you about this question of the role of Israel in this, because at the moment we're talking about this as though this is a two-way street, which is Iran and the US. It's not. There are three people in this, three countries, and the third one, of course, is Israel. What's your assessment of how much influence President Trump now has over Benjamin Netanyahu? Should remind people, of course, that there's a lot of speculation that it was Benjamin Netanyahu who brought or encouraged Donald Trump to be part of this conflict in the first place.
I think that obviously the United States and Israel have a very friendly and cozy relationship. I think it would be overstating it to say that the United States is substantially influenced by Israel. The United States, particularly President Trump, I think does what he wants to do, which can be difficult if you're Pakistan or other countries, European allies, trying to get him to the negotiating table. I think he is he is a man of deep convictions of his own that believes he's doing the right thing. So I don't think Israel impacts the United States much. I think the United States has more influence on Israel than Israel has in the United States, because I think Israel needs the United States support to maintain the power that they have as regional power. So they can't afford to really get on the wrong side of the United States. But the United States is going to do what it wants to do, regardless of Israel's opinion.
I want the three of you just to stay with me briefly, because a short while ago, Iran's military spokesman had vowed to continue attacking U.S. assets and push their troops out of the region.
The wave of effective and devastating attacks by the Iranian armed forces against the military, security and economic infrastructure of the Zionist regime in the occupied territories and centers associated with the criminal America in the region will continue to be heavier and more extensive. We will target the infrastructure of the United States and its allies to deprive them of the region's oil and gas for years and force them to leave the region.
Okay, Negar Mortazavi, I want to come to you off the back of that, because throughout this, the US, Donald Trump particularly, and Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defense, saying that they have control over the Iranian skies, that they have to use their word, decimated, which if I understand means 1 in 10, the Iranian missiles and so on. And yet Iran seems absolutely determined that it's going to stick the course.
Absolutely. Like I said, they are the underdog, but they're also not a paper tiger, as Benjamin Netanyahu has sold to President Trump. And let's not forget, this war is not just one war. This is, in the Iranian mind, a continuation of the June war. Last year, the 12-day war, essentially the Iranians agreed to a ceasefire, and then the war came back to them or restarted again by U.S. and Israel in a much bigger way. This time, the Iranians see it as existential, as a battle of survival, and they have changed their defense doctrine. They have, realized that with President Trump, they think they have shown too much restraint. They have offered off-ramps too early. They accepted a ceasefire, and that's why the war came back to them. So when we talk about a ceasefire and an end to the war, the Iranian thinking is long-term. How do we end this permanently so it doesn't come back to us in 6 months, in a year, sort of this mow the grass mentality that the Israelis have, the way they treat Gaza or the way they go into Lebanon. So that's also the longer game. For the Iranians, they would have fight it once and end it. Fight it once and end it so that it doesn't come back to them. That's why the issue of guarantees is very important. And that's why they also want to come out of this war in a better shape economically, either with sanctions removal or fee collection from Hormuz for reconstruction and, for essentially combating what they have seen as a silent war over the years. The campaign of maximum pressure is not just military, it's also sanctions that have really crippled the Iranian economy.
Eli, I want to come back to you because in the face of this apparent defiance from Iran, of course, there are thousands of U.S. service personnel who are in that region. We've already seen some of them who've been killed. We've also seen aircraft brought down, and of course those extraordinary rescues that were carried out in the next couple of days. As this conflict continues, that does increase the risk to the lives and the safety of the U.S. personnel. And do you think that the U.S. President and Pete Hegseth really understand the risks that the personnel are facing?
Well, I think so. And anytime you're involved in kinetic conflict, you need to expect casualties, you need to expect fatalities. The United States military has really been putting on an interesting display of new capabilities with their operation in Venezuela. And frankly, the amount of kinetic operations that have happened in this particular conflict is pretty stunning, that you've had very minimal casualties. You've had none over Iran. You've had a few service members who were killed when an Iranian missile hit a foreign military base. So obviously casualties are expected. That's one of the very unfortunate costs of war. I think Americans, will obviously see that very poorly, and that's something that President Trump's going to be looking at. But again, I think this is why he's probably looking to escalate, to try to put maximum pressure back on Iran militarily, disarm them, and then once they're fully disarmed and they can't rearm, I'd be surprised if President Trump doesn't say, "Okay, we've declared victory and we're going home."
And we're just going to leave it there. Eli Bremer and Negar Mortazavi and Osama bin Javaid, thank you very much indeed for being with us.